I know you can relate that the path isn't glamorous most of the time.
Right.
Most of the time it's, yourself with your head down, just grinding through something and then getting stopped after a half-hour work because you need to look something up.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're trying to figure out something that you don't know how to figure out, and then you have to somehow figure it out. But the result is more than worth it if you put in the time.
Let's kick it off.
All right.
Well, folks, today I'm sitting here across the table in his sweet in-home studio, eating donuts and drinking coffee with the mighty Pete Honsberger. So some of you might remember Pete. He was actually on episode 106, which would have been exactly 50 episodes ago. So about a year ago worth of episodes, which is crazy. Feels like we just recorded that one. But Pete is the author of the upcoming book, Wedding Toasts 101, The Guide to the Perfect Wedding Speech. He's also the co-host of the new podcast, Smooth Surfaces, which I'm excited. We've got to talk about that a little bit here as well. He is the director of client services and lead facilitator at Culture Shock, a high-performance culture development firm. And there he consults businesses on how to develop company culture and leadership seminars, things like that. So he's an expert when it comes to facilitation. And he was also featured in here locally in Cleveland 25 Under 35 Movers and Shakers Award. So Pete, welcome back to the show, brother.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks for having me. Yeah. Thanks for coming over too.
Yeah, dude, I love it. We've got, the donuts, your cat's licking the plate. It's great.
Yeah, got a little view out the window.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, we probably could have just been recording for the last 45 minutes because we've just been sitting here.
I was thinking the same thing.
Talking about stuff. But, now that we've officially hit record, I think we can dive into some topics that, and I get the opportunity to do rapid fire type questions at you and ask you uncomfortable things that would be weird to bring up in
looking forward to
it. But last time you were on the podcast, we talked about you self-publishing a book in the wedding toast space. But now you've got you're working with a publisher on this new one that comes out a couple weeks from now. What's the official publish
It does.
date?
November 12th.
Nice.
Is the release date.
So I'm looking at it here, Wedding Toast 101. Very professional looking, very solid looking book. So what was the catalyst to going from having that self-published book to now working with a publisher and pushing this out through the more traditional route?
Yeah, if you listened to the first time, episode 106, I had self-published a book called Don't Burn Your Toast, and it was all about how to give a great wedding toast, some of the do's and don'ts. And it was self-published. I Googled and found a publisher called Archway, which was really a great experience to work with. And then I went on for 2 years just trying to scratch and claw and get the name out there, and slowly sales grew every month, really, really marginally. But what I found out is that the self-publishing company sends a few titles every month to other publishers within the Simon & Schuster umbrella. And it caught the attention of one of them, which is called Adams Media. And they saw it, and immediately they said they were sitting around a conference table laughing and joking with each other at the publisher about wedding speeches that they've given or that they've heard, and they were telling funny stories, and they said, you know what, this is a cool topic, and I think it's really relatable. So I got a call out of the blue, I think it was October 2008, almost a year ago from today, and said, hey...
2018.
Oh, excuse me, 2018.
I was just graduating from high school.
2000 and late. And they said, hey... Simon & Schuster has an interest in picking up this book and re-releasing it under a lot wider distribution. Are you interested? And I was like, hell yeah, I am. And so,
yeah, absolutely.
So then the next basically full year was kind of a journey of a much different process from self-publishing, and it really required a lot of patience because I said, they want to buy the book, okay, just here's the manuscript, let's re-release it, let's make it happen, let's start making money. And they said, wait a minute. We need to look at your manuscript again. And eventually it was, you need to change 70% of this. And we're going to take a lot of things out. We're going to add a lot of things. We're going to change the name. We're going to rebrand and all this stuff. And so that was, the catalyst was just a phone call and then a couple follow-up phone calls with them. And then, over 1 year later, it's finally coming back out. So there were times when I was just thinking, man, this is taking forever. But I think that's, from what I understand, that's more of the traditional publishing world is They want to do it right. So it just takes longer.
So we grabbed coffee maybe a month or two ago, and you told me a story about how there's a few actual wedding toasts in here, like examples.
Yep.
And you were looking for one more, so submitted your own kind of fake one that you put together.
Right.
Tell us about that, because that's a great story.
Well, they asked me, can you provide 5 full examples of wedding toasts? So I thought of 1 or 2 that I had written in the past, and I reached out to some friends and some family and some cousins and that kind of thing. And I came up with 4 that I really thought, embodied the 5 critical cogs that we talk about, those steps that you want to make to a complete speech. And what happened is I was 1 short. So I said, you know what, I'm going to make one up and I'm going to make it kind of thinly veiled as a wedding speech that would be given in a movie. And so I'm not ashamed to admit this. The movie was called The Princess Diaries with Anne Hathaway, young Anne Hathaway. I think Mandy Moore was in it as well. And I pretended I wrote the speech from the perspective of Mia, her friend, as if her and the boy that she ended up getting with at the end of the movie ended up getting married. And she was the princess of, what was it, Thermopylae or something?
Or something, as if you don't know.
Or something,
exactly.
Yeah.
Something like that, I don't know.
From what I hear, yeah. So I wrote this whole toast, and I thought it was so clever and funny, and I was so proud of myself for doing it. I was literally like patting myself on the back about it, and the publisher came back a week later. They're like, yeah, we're not going to put this in the book. They said, we're gonna have somebody else submit one, and go out and get one more instead. So that was a little bit of a shot, but I thought I was so clever and funny with it, and I thought it would fit the theme of the book. But so I released it as a blog post instead on the weddingtoast101.com website.
Yeah, so everybody could go check that out. Got to keep the ego in check.
Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe it's a really lame idea, but at the time I thought it was really funny.
So going into that world of working with like the traditional publishers and them having control, a level of control, and you giving up a level of control, kind of what was that process like for you, or how did that, what things did you run into with that bit?
Yeah, I think it taught me both humility and patience, because the first book, I wrote it in about 3.5 months, and it took me another 4 months to just get it published. So we're talking 7.5 months since I, wrote the first word. It was already out. In this case, they had real editors looking at it, and they were thinking of a lot in terms of structure and does this flow? Does it really make sense? Is it all over the place? Or can we get it into a linear structure? And so looking back on it now, I'm really grateful what they did, but they pushed back a lot. And so right at the beginning, it was, hey, reformat this into our format and send us the manuscript. And then they redlined it essentially and sent it back to me with all of these suggestions. And hey, you need to rewrite this. You need to add a new chapter. You need to add a recap for every chapter. We need all kinds of case studies. Like there were just dozens of case studies that I was required to, either think about, reach out to people I know, really ponder toasts that I've witnessed in the past. And so there was a lot of real life examples that I needed to produce. And they wanted to get away from too much theory, which makes a lot of sense because they wanted practical value, and they wanted, okay, if somebody has no idea what they're doing, or if they know a little bit about what they're doing, they need to see real examples of things that people did well, things that people did poorly, so that they're going to get the most value possible out of the book.
Right.
So I went into there thinking, well, I'm a great writer. They picked up my book for a reason. And I came out of there thinking, wow, I have a ton to learn about the whole process, about what makes a professional book. And I think the result, for anyone who's going to find it, the content is somewhat similar, but it is like a totally different book because it's a lot more professional. It's a lot more of a step-by-step process now, and it has a lot more real-life examples.
Excuse me. No, I'm glad you bring that up, because I think, a lot of us have this idea of what, making it to the next level, whether, it's in authorship, entrepreneurship, your career looks like. And then you get there and you have this idea in your head of like, okay, now I'm working with this legit publisher. This thing's going to take off in the next couple of months. We're going to just, revamp it and put it out there in the ether. And then you realize the process isn't exactly what you thought it would be. I mean, I know I experienced this just with launching a podcast.
Yeah.
And, I had this idea of, all right, I'll start doing episodes. I'll do it consistently for 6 months or a year. And then, I'm going to be famous.
Let the money roll in.
Yeah, I'll be an internet sensation. Come on, what's not to love? And, that's not necessarily the case. You learn a lot. And there were so many positive takeaways in that first year. And I started to find my voice. And I started to get clarity on what it was that the podcast was about and what direction I want to take it and where I wanted to take my life. But it wasn't necessarily the, okay, now I've got this income stream and I'm quitting my job tomorrow. So I like that you share that, and especially now coming out the other side and be able to look at the final product and be like, it came out really good. Just the path there wasn't quite what I expected, but you had the flexibility to kind of work with what the punches that came up and all that.
Yeah. Well, and I know you can relate that the path isn't glamorous most of the time. Right. Most of the time it's, yourself with your head down, just grinding through something and then getting stopped after a half-hour work because you need to look something up. Mm-hmm. And then you're trying to figure out something that you don't know how to figure out, and then you have to somehow figure it out. But the result is more than worth it if you put in the time. I kind of think of it almost parallel to the fact that we bought a fixer-upper house, my wife Jenna and I, and we renovated the entire thing. And it took us over 2 years. And I just showed you our bathroom, our second bathroom that still isn't finished.
Right.
We bought the house, September 2017. But like we could have probably paid somebody and, took out a second mortgage or home equity line and just, paid somebody a fortune to do it in a month if we wanted to. Instead, we decided to, go the longer term route where we're saving money, but we're doing it right. We're doing it the way we want it. We're not cutting any corners. And every time you see progress along the way, it's even more gratifying when you do that and when you can have the patience. So that project taught us some patience. The book experience and that journey from self-published to traditional publishing, I think, continue to teach me more patience and humility and just the ability to accept feedback of others. Because sometimes you think, I'm the person who wrote this, or I'm the person who's running the podcast. I get a lot of listeners. I know what I'm doing and I don't have anything that anyone else could teach me. And that really couldn't be further from the truth. Mm-hmm. Like the ability to just say, you know what, maybe I disagree with the feedback, but I'm at least going to let it sink in. I'm going to accept the feedback and I'm going to think about it before I immediately type that email response and say, no, I think I'm going to keep it this way. And just think about, like, from somebody else's perspective, from a reader's perspective, is what they're saying legitimate, and would they rather have it the other way? And I did push back on a couple pieces of the journey, but for the most part, these are professional editors and they knew what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the feedback they gave me was outstanding.
Yeah. Yeah. And it takes that humility to be able to accept that feedback, especially because you had a finished product going into the process too.
Right.
Like you had your self-published book. So it takes a lot of humility to take this thing that, you were proud of, you spent a lot of time on, and kind of reworking it. And I think I love the analogy of the house and, renovating the house. And by the time you're done, you finish the next bathroom, then you got the basement, you renovate.
Yep.
And then, a couple years down the road, you realize, all right, we've got to renovate we got to update this. Like what we did before, like it's always, life is a work in progress.
Right.
And it's the same thing with any of your pursuits, entrepreneurial or whatever it might be, that, it's always a work in progress.
Yeah.
And there's always new things to learn, things change, ways to improve it.
Well, it taught me too to be grateful for every piece of progress along the way. I remember when we got the first 2 bedrooms carpeted in the room, because that meant we had torn out the floor, we had painted it, and now it was carpeted. Now I could live in the house while the renovation was going on. Yeah. So the room we're sitting in was our living room for about 8 months. So I had a couch, I had a TV, and this is where I lived basically, and I slept in the room next door that was also carpeted. And so I was so happy that just that little bit of progress had been made.
Yeah.
And then everything else, like one room at a time, was finished.
Right.
You know, and we were celebrating every piece of small progress. And so that made the whole journey fun as well. Mm-hmm. The same with the book. Every time I finished a chapter, reworked a chapter, and we agreed on the content with the publisher, it just felt amazing. And it was like, you know, one at a time, we're making progress here. So it's not like you're grinding and you never see any gratification.
Yeah.
You just have to understand that it's going to be a long journey. If it's going to be worthwhile, it's going to be difficult.
Yep.
But there are milestones and there are little pieces of gratification along the way that kind of keep you motivated and keep you energized. And then at the end, the finished product is even better.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of journeys, you're starting a new one, and we'd be remiss not to mention the Smooth Surfaces podcast that I was listening to episode number 1 on the way over here. It's awesome. You and your wife Jenna, tell us a little bit about that and you know what the catalyst was there.
Yeah, Jenna has been encouraging this for a while now, and we just decided, you know what, we're going to figure it out. We know it's going to be difficult. We're not professional podcasters by any stretch of the imagination.
Although your podcast studio we're singing is way more legit than anything that I've got, but so you might be, and you just didn't know it.
I mean, we kind of had most of this equipment around the house already, and we just put it all into the same room.
Nice.
But yeah, we did our own research and figured out how can we make a podcast live. What are the steps you need to take to put it on Apple Podcasts? And Jenna and I, you know, we talk a lot about, you know, we try to be aware of lessons that we're learning as they're happening, and we try to reflect on that and keep an open line of communication in our marriage. And we thought that we had some funny stories. We thought we had some lessons that might be worth sharing with other people, at least for our friends. We thought our friends might enjoy hearing some stories of early in our relationship and what we learned, how we got over some of the early obstacles. We want to talk about our home renovation process because it's been kind of a fun, winding, you know, journey. Mm-hmm. But we're so glad that we've taken it on. We want to talk about anything else related to, you know, marriage, friendships, the fact that we were a little bit of an intercultural marriage with her being, you know, of Serbian background and me being more of a Catholic upbringing. Nice. And some of the, you know, just some of the nuances and some of the odd things that have happened along the way related to that. And so we decided to launch this podcast, and Jenna came up with the name Smooth Surfaces because, you know, a lot of times relationships, especially on social media, they seem smooth or they seem like everything is perfect. And we all know that that's not true. Right. Anyone who's in a committed relationship. And I know you and I were talking, you know, with your wife being pregnant right now, you know, sometimes it can be difficult.
Yep.
And you've got to be kind of in the line of fire.
Oh, yeah.
And so, you know, but like on the whole, it is a smooth and a, you know, beautiful thing if you look at big picture. Mm-hmm. But day-to-day basis, you know, there's things that you need to get through and you need to get over. And, you know, we've talked about the way that we've done that in our relationship. And to some extent, it's kind of interesting to go back and walk down memory lane of, you know, what were we thinking the first 3 months of our relationship? And, you know, in that first episode, we talked about the day we met. And then what did I do the next week to try to keep that momentum going? And then, you know, what problem did we run into a little bit later in our relationship? And how do we, you know, kind of handle that stuff? So we thought that kind of content would be relatable to other people around our age.
And I just get jazzed about seeing new podcasts, you know, coming out into the world, and especially with content that is, I think what you guys do really good is it's very relatable. You know, you're very authentic in it, and so I recommend everybody go and check it out because it could inspire some of the folks who are listening. I've heard from a lot of our listeners who have an interest in launching a podcast. Or even have an interest in, you know, entrepreneurship. And this has kind of been my entry point into entrepreneurship was the podcasting world, where it's a way to, you know, at a very low risk type scenario, you know, doesn't require too much investment up front. And you can start building an audience and building a brand. And I know that's not necessarily your guys' motivation at this point is for this to be some,
right.
Or maybe it is, I don't know. But it to be some sort of, you know, big business down the road. But it's cool just to see how you guys, you know, kick this thing off. And, you know, I'm sure there were some nerves you had to battle back, but now you're putting something new out in the world. So
Yeah, absolutely. And there was a lot of thoughts even before we launched anything about, well, why would anyone care about this? Who's going to listen? And we both made the decision after some discussion, we don't care if anyone listens. Yeah. We just want to have an outlet to be able to chat with each other. And it's another bonding experience between she and I.
Yeah.
Like just the ability to sit down and recollect some things that have happened and to think critically about lessons we've learned and lessons that we continue to learn, and then go ahead and share those with people, whether they're our age, whether they're older and they're dealing with something relationship wise, or whether they just want to learn or be entertained, or especially people who are younger that maybe are single or are not in a relationship or are in one and they're having trouble communicating, or they want to know how to take the next step. We can't speak for anybody else, but we can tell our story.
Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, everybody go check that out. Smooth Surfaces, and I think that's a cool one to check out. And then that kind of parlays into another topic that I wanted to chat with you about while I was here. Along the relationship path is this concept of friendships and who you surround yourself with. And the reason I was thinking about it really came up in my head on the drive over here of when when in your childhood and in college and stuff, at least my experience was, friendships come pretty naturally just based on your environment. You're surrounded, going through the same experience with these people, going to school with people, living in the dorm, playing sports, whatever, your upbringing may have been. You kind of have this natural group to plug into, and relationships just really are pretty easily come about. For some, that's how my childhood at least was, is, I never had to consciously choose,
right,
who I was going to be hanging out with. It was kind of automatic.
And you're surrounded by people all the time,
right?
Especially in high school and college.
And then, you graduate from school, you're in the real world, and all of a sudden, and you still have your friends. You've got great friends from those days. You've got people you're working with. But my experience has been, especially, I can speak from a guy's perspective because that's how it's been for me, and I am a guy. You don't have that automatic group that you're plugged into, and you have to be a little bit more intentional about building relationships and friendships. And I think you and me are a good example because, we got connected through a mutual connection. We had coffee, and then, next thing you know, we've over the years grabbed breakfast, grabbed drinks. We've done multiple podcast interviews, and we've gotten to know each other, and I feel like it's been a great relationship and friendship that's built and continues to build. But I want to talk to you about it because we've gone through this, and you're somebody who has a lot of the same interests in me. Is interested in the side hustles and the building of the businesses,
right?
And what how to take your career and your life to the next level. So, how do you think about building quality, friendships, relationships, peer groups now at this stage in your life?
Well, I think there's a tendency, because everybody has their own things going on now, and a lot of people that I grew up with are in their own relationships or married or now expecting or have young kids, that it's easy to just go to work, come home, spend the time with only your spouse or only the people that are in your family, just because there's a lot going on. And it you're not just finding yourself at a group settings as much anymore, unless you're talking about coworkers at work. And so you're right. It takes an intentionality, and it takes seeking out new relationships. It takes, a little bit of courage to want to reach out and make new connections. And you have to, for me, I've always been interested in learning more and meeting new people. And I really believe in that, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most amount of time with mentality. And I kind of even extend that to, I want to meet 5 more people at some point, and maybe those people will be the new people in my 5 people, so to speak. So my number is probably a little bit larger in terms of who I want to surround myself with.
It's like MySpace, you
exactly.
Those people get pushed out of your top.
Are you in my 5
friends?
Yeah. But what I've tried to do is be open to the possibility of meeting new people and continuing to make relationships with people that align with my interests and things that things I believe in. And then I've also tried to set myself up for success to some extent, put myself in position to succeed. Whether when we got introduced, that's one of 10 or 20, a year that somebody will offer a connection and say, hey, I think you might want to meet this person or have coffee. I'll almost always say yes to that.
Yeah.
Because you never know where it's going to lead. And sometimes you have a good conversation and, it's, hey, let's try to do this once a year. Or, we should do this again sometime, and maybe you do, maybe you don't. But then sometimes, you really hit it off with somebody, and it makes sense because, you think, I think that you can offer me advice when it comes to a lot of things, and I can probably offer you my perspective on some different things. And it's just fun hanging out.
Yeah.
And so, putting yourself in position to be successful, I think is probably just as important as seeking out those connections. If you're doing both of those things and putting yourself in position, to some extent is saying yes when people are offering things to you. But another extent is, just being out and about, being at a networking event once in a while, like attending an event that maybe you wouldn't normally think of. They do like the wine and yoga kind of things around town. And once in a while, if that's something that's interesting to you, or something that you've been meaning to try. Mm-hmm. One of my best friends from college and I started doing spin class.
Nice.
Every couple of weeks we'll go to a cycle bar and do that. We've really enjoyed that, and it's been a time that we can kind of reconnect and do something new, and just talk about life a little bit before and after the class.
Yep.
And you're right. I think, when we get into the 30s that we're in right now, like there's a vulnerability to potentially losing touch with your old friends, and then you're kind of in this void unless you're intentionally seeking out new friends, and building on relationships that you already have. So I think, like from my perspective, I just want to put myself in a good position and be open to it when other people ask as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And then like you just used the word in a little bit of a different sense, but vulnerability.
Yep.
And I think that's another one that comes to, like on this topic that comes to mind for me, is when you are put in these opportunities to connect with a new person, like you said, some of them may go nowhere. Probably 95% of the coffee meetings I go on, they don't have necessarily a follow-up, or maybe a year from then we might do it again, or it might be somebody who, is in my quote-unquote network, whatever that means. But going into those situations, what I've learned for me is it's such a more positive interaction when I go in vulnerable, willing to share a bit about myself, not just like, hey, I'm a podcaster, here's all the things that are going well for me right now. But I go in those and I'm just like, here's who I actually am. Yeah, I'm struggling with these things, and
right.
Just really opening up to people. I mean, not going in there and crying about my, childhood issues, like a therapy session on the first time I meet somebody, because that would just be weird, and they would definitely never talk to you again. But, just going in and being authentic with people, I think, really opens the door for those relationships to build too. So,
yeah, I try to be relatable, just like you're saying. Yeah. Like chances are, if we're in a similar position in life, we're going through some of the same things. Mm-hmm. Even if somebody else is much younger or much older, there are things that connect human beings in general that we've all either been through before or we are going through at the same time. And so I try to be transparent as well when it comes to that. I want to talk about things I'm excited about, and I want to know if you're excited about the same things, but I also want to talk about things that I'm struggling with, because we could probably lend a hand to each other to some extent, or we could connect each other with somebody else that might be, might have a perspective or might have a solution. And you just never know what could come out of those type of circumstances. And another thing that I think about, I heard this from at actually the Iron Sharpens Iron retreat that we've attended together a few times. A speaker named
Shout out to Nick Daddis.
Yeah, shout out Nick and Joe.
ISI Life Podcast.
Absolutely. But Dr. Michael Brown was the speaker a couple retreats ago, and he said something that has really stuck with me, and it's, be interested more than you're interesting. So if you can be interested in others genuinely and ask them questions about themselves and what's going on with them, what inspires them, what they're excited about, and focus on that, more so than I want to be the most interesting person in the room, because then you're just talking about yourself constantly. If I can focus in interactions, especially when I meet new people, on being interested in them, those relationships tend to grow faster for me, because then people are like, okay, this guy actually cares about what I have to say. And in fact, Jenna and I talk about it a lot. In social settings, or when we go to weddings and sit at the same table with other people, we notice when other people are only talking about themselves and never ask us any questions about us, versus if they're engaged in kind of a more of a mutual conversation.
Right.
And that's something I think about a lot, and that's helped build relationships. And that's something I appreciate about you a lot, is you not only are excited about what you're doing and you have questions about what you're, what's going on in your life, but you're genuinely interested in what's happening with me and what's happening with my family and what's happening with my side hustles and all that kind of stuff.
Right. And you notice when you have two people who have that mindset of being more interested and interesting, that it's almost the opposite of these typical conversations where you see people struggling to try to talk about themselves the most, where it's like two people trying to push the conversation in the other person's direction.
Right.
And it ends up being just a really good, like you said, mutual conversation. But I pick up on that as well. And Callie and I, my wife's really good about like asking the questions and turning the conversation to, engaging with whoever we're surrounding ourselves with. And you pick up on it. And if it's something that you're intentional about, you start to notice that whenever you're out and about and talking to other people.
Right. And it's not that you can never talk about yourself,
right?
Because there are things that are exciting that you want to share with other people. But if you're in a mutual kind of relationship or friendship, you'll get a chance to talk about yourself, because that person will ask you about yourself, and then you can briefly talk about yourself and then ask them about themselves. And we much prefer the mutual relationships than one where every time I talk to somebody, all they talk about is themselves.
Yeah, I totally agree. So before we wrap up here, I can't believe we've already done 30 minutes here, but I want to circle back to the book a little bit, Wedding Toasts 101. And I know that a lot of the topics you talk about in this and the concepts you cover, you talk about them in relationship to wedding toasts. But I think that a lot of this is applicable outside of the world of wedding toasts too. Things like owning the room or relating to your audience. Like, are there any concepts here that I just want to leave the audience with some practical advice that they can take away from this, that they might be able to start implementing in their world to, take their interactions, whatever they might be, to the next level?
I definitely think so. Imagine if you're speaking at a wedding, if you're facilitating a meeting at your office, if you're running a meeting, if you have to present in front of a board of directors, if you're on a nonprofit board, if you're just in a group setting with friends and you want to be, somebody asked you a question and you want to have, good answer, or you want to be entertaining to people. I was thinking about this in other, imagine if you're brought on the morning news, how are you going to react to that? If you want to get into podcasting, like, I can't speak at all as being an expert in that, but anytime you're in front of a group of people, or even a really small group, what I've found to be successful is, number one, if I am as authentic as possible. All right, I want to relate to whoever the audience is. I want to be vulnerable, like we talked about. Like, I want to let people know that, that there's things that I think I'm good at, but there are also things that I struggle with, and that makes it more relatable, because a lot of times people are in the same situation. Sometimes I'll even say in a group setting, hey, if I'm in your position right now, I'm probably thinking this. Yeah. All right. And if you're thinking this, you're not alone. And here's the answer that I found that has been successful for me, or here's something that clients have found to be a good solution. And maybe this will help you. And then we can have the conversation from there. And the last thing on authenticity is just being as transparent as possible. I want to come off as, I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to be honest when I don't. But if I do have something I think will help, I want to be honest, and I want to tell you that as well. Another thing I think about is number two would be presence. Like how do you carry yourself in those instances? And in the book, I talk about, especially at a wedding, I talk about this, just repeating to yourself before you get up there: head, hands, feet. HHF, head, hands, feet, head, hands, feet. When you stand up in front of a group, what is your head doing? Number one, is your head up most of the time? Or are you down looking at a page? Or if you're giving a presentation at work, are you staring at a PowerPoint screen? Or are you staring at the board? Or are you going to be making eye contact with people? The hands, especially if you have a microphone, what are you going to do with your microphone hand? Are you going to keep it still, or is it going to be waving around so that it's hard for people to hear? You really want to keep it as still as possible, and you want to keep that microphone as close to your face as possible. And then your feet, are you slouching? Are your feet really nervous? Are you moving around a lot? Are you, I found myself at times before literally like walking in a circle, just because it can be intimidating sometimes, especially if you're not that comfortable in front of a group. There can be there can be a temptation to just move your feet a lot. So can you keep your feet straight, or can you get into a little bit of a routine with what you're going to do with your feet? So if you could say head, hands, feet to yourself and get those 3 things right in terms of presence, you can control, how you come off positively to a group of people. And the last thing I'll say is just, about owning the room. Like there's a mentality, and, I think you're in the same boat as I really admire all the content that the Navy SEALs put out there.
Oh yeah.
And I've read Extreme Ownership a bunch of times. I'm really into Jocko Willink and Leif Babin and those guys, and
David Goggins.
Oh, yeah. And all those people. And one thing that I've tried to learn from anything I've learned from the SEALs is that they own whatever room they walk into. They think like, I'm here to dominate, basically. Or this is, if I'm speaking, I'm in charge of the room. And that's when I walk into a situation where I am supposed to be in charge of a group, I want to be in charge of that room. Yeah. And not so much in a military way or like I'm going to be yelling at people necessarily, but, I want to be comfortable with silence. I want to be comfortable staring at the room until people stop talking.
Yeah.
If I need somebody to listen up, I want to be comfortable holding a microphone and staring at people and looking around the room and waiting for them to stop talking so that I can start. And I want to be comfortable, looking up at people. And if I need to go out and chase people into a hallway of a session to get them to come back in time in kind of a funny way, say, hey, we're starting. Hey, it's, we're 30 seconds late. Let's go. We gotta get moving. I want to respect your time.
Right.
Like those are the kind of things I think about when owning a room. And that's kind of goes back to being confident in the type of material you have and the content that you're going to be providing in that session. But, if you can be really authentic and relate to an audience, think about what they might be thinking. If you can be cognizant, have the awareness of what's my presence, like what am I giving off to the group right now, and you can go in there intentionally saying, this is my room. I'm going to own the room as long as I'm in charge of whatever this session is. I think that puts you ahead of probably 90% of speakers out there.
For sure. Owning the room, the one thing that came to mind for me is I don't think this is the right approach for everybody, but Gary Vaynerchuk, he talks about when he goes on stage that he is just pissed off at the audience. Like he goes into that ready just to yell at them, essentially. And that fits in with his whole, his whole persona and his shtick. But I think that when you watch him speak, he's as in your face as he can be for there being thousands of people in the audience. You feel like he's coming up to you face to face and getting it.
It's almost like a wake-up call for
exactly.
you individually, or you're getting smacked upside the head a little bit.
Exactly. And so it's just that owning the room. That's his approach on it. So like I said, I don't think I would be comfortable necessarily going in there being pissed off at everybody. That might not work for me, but it's just like one of those things that just how you talk about it, I think is so true. You got to be comfortable and you got to be confident. So, good stuff, man. So, before we dive into where people can find more about you, I also wanted to ask, and you may be familiar with this being a common question on my podcast, but the time machine question of if you could go back. I mean, obviously, between self-publishing a book, writing this book, all of your experience with facilitation, now launching podcasts, you do a lot of stuff. You commentate high school football games on weekends. Like you do. That's one thing I love about you.
I try.
Yeah, is you see something that you're interested in and that you're passionate about, and you go out there and you actually do it. But what's one piece of advice after doing all this stuff, in your 20s and early 30s, that if you could go back to maybe the age where you're just graduating from college, is there one piece of advice that you might give to yourself then?
Yeah, I think I would be more intentional earlier. And what I mean by that is, I would create a plan, even if it was on a sheet of napkin paper or whatever. but I would create, quarterly goals for myself. What do I want to accomplish in the next 90 days? I would create a little bit of a longer term, a year from now, what do I want my life to look like, or 3 years from now? And it could involve how much money do you want to be making? It could involve what industry do you want to be in? But the more I've lived, the more I understand that, if you can set those goals and opportunities and aspirations for yourself, then you can work your way back and figure out, okay, well, what can I do in the next week to start making progress on that? And what I've done in the last 2 years, I actually got this advice from Joe Haddad from University Tees, one of Nick's business partners, is in my notes app on my phone, I've put my next 90-day goals personally and professionally, as well as what I want, a year from now, what's my 1 year plan? And then 3 years from now, what do I want my life to look like? And it can involve family and all that kind of stuff. So I try to be intentional. And now, because it's in the notes app, if I'm on an airplane going somewhere, I can be looking at it without Wi-Fi. Once a week on Sunday nights, I try to look at and see, how did I do? Did I make progress this week on any of these 90-day goals or the bigger picture goals? So I would have been intentional earlier, as opposed to, just spraying out resumes everywhere when I graduated from college and hoping that something stuck. Yep. It was a little more of a plan than a wish.
Yeah. No, I think that's super smart. And, that would have helped me a lot too. If I thought the way now that I did when I was 23.
Right.
Oh boy, things could have been different.
I mean,
it's all the journey.
It's fine that, we can't do anything about the past now, but we can pick it up now. Or I'm sure, I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, but just doing this podcast has probably opened you up to all kinds of ideas and lessons that you didn't know before that have probably been helpful, right?
Yeah. And it's one of the biggest benefits and things I love about doing the podcast is it forces me into having these types of conversations, on average once a week. And it makes me think about these things, and I think about what kind of content I want to put out there and the types of, people that I want to have conversations to record. And so it forces me into that mindset, because it's so easy to get caught up in the, okay, what's right in front of me, especially in my personal life, and for all of these, personal development and long-term type thinking things to be put on the back burner. So I love that you have a process that, on Sundays you're going in there and you're looking at it. I think it's a great idea, and it's just something that people should be doing and need to be doing if they really want their life to ultimately go the direction that they want it to.
Yeah, it kind of gives you a feeling of control, even if you may not have full control over what happens to you. Like, you can at least control what you're doing and how you're being intentional.
Right.
And I think about, like, in terms of that, if I didn't create those plans, I would probably be going through every week just trying to survive the week.
Yeah.
And then you get to the next week. And then 2 years go by and you're kind of like, well, what happened in that time period? And so if anybody's feeling right now, even like, I'm just trying to survive the week, there are things you can do to be intentional and even do things outside of your normal job that you can start building. Like we've talked about, it takes a lot of patience to do that. And you've got to kind of be willing to grind, in some of those off hours for a long time. But that stuff, if you really want to be intentional, you can make progress and you can be strategic about your own life and your own progress.
Yep.
As opposed to just trying to live day to day and survive the week.
Yeah, for sure. All right, man. Well, we did it. But where can people find the book, and maybe even plug where they can find the podcast too? Because I don't want Jenna to be mad at me for not bringing it up.
I appreciate the opportunity. Wedding Toast 101. You can go to Wedding Toasts, and toast is plural, weddingtoast101.com, where you can order the book. It's on pre-order still until November 12th. But it'll get shipped out to you right on November 12th if you do that. It is on Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, IndieBound. Hopefully by the end of this year, by Christmas season, you'll be able to see this in bookstores near you. The podcast, on the other hand, is called Smooth Surfaces, and it's on Apple Podcasts right now. We still need to go back and watch a couple more YouTube videos to figure out how to put it on Spotify and Stitcher, or maybe I'll ask Brad off the air
help you with that.
on how to do that. But Apple Podcasts right now is where Smooth Surfaces is at. And if you have Instagram and you want to follow the Wedding Toast page that's at Wedding Toast 101 on Instagram.
Beautiful. We'll link it all up in the show notes, and I highly recommend you guys go check out, the podcast, the book. It's all good stuff. So thanks, Pete. Appreciate you being here, or me being here. You inviting me here.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming out, and it's just really grateful to be able to chat like this.